right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Mental Health Awareness Month, by the way. I don't know if you knew that about May, but it is. So this is a timely forum that you're in right now. We are going to talk about the ELCA social message, and it's 10 years old, but it still has a lot of wisdom for today and beyond as we journey with Jesus. And you can find this message. It's called The Body of Christ and Mental Illness at the elca.org website, if you haven't looked at that already. So some housekeeping items first. And Debbie, by the way, I have a little bit of an echo from my end, but do you hear it?
I just muted myself thinking that it might have been me, but it seemed like it was still, there was still some feedback. So let me, oh, now it seems like it's gone.
Yeah, let me testing.
That was me. This is Vicki Barnhart. I just muted myself and it went away.
Oh,
so I'll mute myself again.
Thank you.
Vicki, that's a lot of power you have. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I can. That's so much better. Okay. All right. So let's start with who I am. So my name is Debbie Doubrava. I'm a psychotherapist. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I'm a licensed professional counselor and also a registered play therapist. I'm in private practice at this point in time, and I'm doing a lot of stuff virtually, like we are today, since this pandemic. Some of my specialties are trauma-informed care and play therapy, and I work with all ages. I work with couples, I work with families. In addition to that, I love teaching and speaking about a variety of topics. Happen to be the wife of an ELCA pastor. I'm also the mom of our 2 kids. And I recently published a children's book that I'm very proud of, with more coming. And I am also a 20-year breast cancer survivor. So all of that said, what is true of me and any workshop leader is that I'm going to speak from my own experiences, both personally and professionally, and that I also may have my own bias, as we all do. So just kind of give grace to yourself and me as we go along. So we're covering a big topic. It's mental health, and we have an hour. It's also a sensitive topic, right? So I just want to name, as I always do in anything that I'm teaching, that we all always have the right to take care of ourselves. So whatever you need to do along the way in this hour, to take breaks, to opt out of something. I have some activities along the way that we're going to do. You do what you need to do to take care of you. And as we go along, I certainly welcome questions. So there is a chat feature, and we have a moderator, the amazing Debbie Clark, who is going to let me know if I'm missing anything in there, or you could certainly raise your hand if you needed to. And if you don't have, we don't have enough time to kind of adequately cover what you've asked, I put in the chat feature how to reach me, my phone number and my email, and you're welcome to keep that on hand for today, for beyond, and reach out to me as needed. We are recording, Debbie wanted us to know. And that said, we could edit as needed if anything comes up along the way that's private, or if we do some questions at the end that we don't want included in this. And I think we need to be done in an hour by 12:10, right? So you get to 12:15, you're going to need to click on your closing original main event Zoom link. Did I get that right, Debbie? Okay.
Yes, you need to go back to the main Zoom link when we're finished here.
Perfect. All right. So I hope you guys are having a good morning. So let me tell you about this topic, how I got connected to it. The deacon, Marcia Roscoe, who's also amazing, contacted me and said, we have something called social messages, and there's one on mental illness. Would you cover this? I said, absolutely. And then I was like, all right, what's a social message? So you might already know that. I might be literally preaching to the choir, but I wanted to let you know that I did my research and I learned a couple things about what a social message in general is. And all these things make me really proud to be a Lutheran. I already was, but they make me even more proud. So there are currently 15 ELCA social messages that exist, and they are put out on kind of timely and important topics. They cover a wide variety of things from sexuality to suicide to gender-based violence. The earliest one was in 1988, and that was on AIDS. The most recent was in 2020, and it was on government and civic engagement in the US. And then there are also statements. So there are 13 social statements. So in contrast to the messages, these are kind of a longer process, as I understand it, this 5-year process of discernment and adoption. But overall, in my research, what I was struck with was just how much I respect and appreciate the ELCA in just simply tackling these conversations, right, and opening them up. It's not necessary for us to agree on all aspects of doctrine. For us to talk about things, we can and maybe really even should respectfully and prayerfully have dialogue around these topics, maybe especially even when we disagree. So I was great, always happy to know that we're talking about the important things. Before we really get into this, though, I'm going to do a practice with you that I often do in my office. It's a mindfulness exercise. And since we're talking about mental health, mindfulness is one of the best things I think we can do for our mental health. And really going to therapy is a mindfulness practice. Prayer, as you know it, is a mindfulness practice. So I'm going to kind of walk you through this. Sometimes I will read something to someone and just kind of invite noticing what comes up around it. And this is going to just kind of set the tone for talking about this topic and also for any kind of uncomfortable topics that come up in life. So the poem I'm going to read is called Rumi's poem, The Guest House. It's one of my favorites. So here's what I would love for you to do as you are comfortable and able. Looks like everyone is kind of seated comfortably, but putting your feet on the ground if possible, just kind of comfortable position with your hands in your lap. If you are comfortable closing your eyes, that's a lovely way to go inward. Some people don't feel comfortable doing that, and that's okay too. So what I would invite you to do is just kind of do what I call a downward gaze. So you're kind of looking down at your legs, just a soft gaze. So you're not, making eye contact or staring at something in particular, but just a soft gaze. So in this position, let's start with a deep healing breath. So our breath is always with us, and sometimes drawing attention to it is the most basic, simple thing we can do for us. So taking a deep breath in through your nose, letting your body fill up, and exhale through your mouth. One more deep inhale through your nose. Exhale through your mouth, letting go. So inhale, you notice that you're breathing in. And exhale, you notice that you're breathing out. And listening with curiosity and a compassionate heart to these words as we explore the topic of mental illness today. The guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So deep breath in this moment, breathing into those words and wisdom, and exhale, you release. And now either opening your eyes or looking back up. I think you've already had a big morning. Let's do a stretch. Also a great way to get energy going. So just stretch and move anything that needs to move in this moment. Exercise is a great way also to take care of your mental health. Okay. So this being human truly is a guest house. Emotions are not good or bad. They are necessary and they're really important teachers to us. That said, just being human means that we are also at risk for mental illness. So our nervous system is this amazing thing. It's this wiring that protects us. It helps us to learn from our experience and our emotions. It rallies us to do the fight, flight, or freeze thing for survival. This very same system can also set us up to be dysregulated, to be off balance in some way in our brain. And then you add in genetics, environment, trauma experiences, living in a really often broken world, social conditioning, the messages we get from others, simply having parents and caregivers in a childhood, living through adolescence, right? Multi-generational trends in family systems. And you can see how our guest house can get very crowded and off balance, right? So let's talk about what mental illness is. The social message from 2012 gives a really good definition. Mental illness is a health condition that changes a person's thinking, feelings, or behaviors, or maybe all three, and that causes the person distress or difficulty in functioning. So what struck me when I was reading this message is how I don't actually use the words mental illness very often, interestingly, as a psychotherapist. Even though that's what I do work with in some ways, absolutely, it's not really the language that I use. It's not that it's wrong or good or bad, but if I were to describe what I do, if I'm talking to kids, I say I'm a feelings doctor. I might say that I work with mental health issues or struggles. And I think part of my reason for that is that it just feels kind of like more inclusive language, and more likely that you and me and everyone are going to see ourselves in need of that kind of help. You know, it's hard to ask for help sometimes. And the reality is we could all use support sometimes. If I ran the world, I say this often, I truly would have everyone in the world have a therapist and a play therapist right from the beginning. You know, if you think about it, we have a dentist, right? We have eye doctors. We have OBGYN doctors. We have all these people on our health team. Why don't we have a psychotherapist on our health team, right? Why not? It's so important to us. So mental illness, as talked about in the statement, can range from mild to serious. It can range from episodic to chronic, and this can all depend on the diagnosis, as well as you need to factor in kind of the baseline, which is kind of the starting average place of functioning for someone versus their current functioning of whoever the person is that you're kind of taking into consideration. In 2020, NAMI reported that 1 in 5 US adults experience mental illness each year, and 1 in 20 experience serious mental illness. So kind of serious mental illness might be defined as ones that are more chronic, perhaps schizophrenia, bipolar, very severe depression. My first job a long, long time ago with my bachelor's degree in psychology and elementary ed was at an adult inpatient acute care hospital. And the criteria for inpatient is that you are a threat to yourself or others in some way. So you're either suicidal or homicidal. And in that job, I really gained an incredibly healthy respect for all the humbling ways our brain can get off balance, and how the reality is that it could be any one of ourselves, including me, who might be in need of serious intervention, depending on what cards life or biology has dealt us in any given moment. So sometimes doing that job, you know, I certainly was interested with young eyes in the field of seeing the cases of more chronic, serious mental illness. It's a humbling thing to watch someone's brain trick them, someone who's in an active psychotic state. And that, you know, kind of hits you and you recognize, oh, that's mental illness. Sometimes you don't always recognize it though. You know, there were people in there and I often, you know, noticed that the difference between me and the person I was sitting across from was that I had keys to the locked doors, right? And that I was also not the person who in that moment was in need of being hospitalized. I was not in acute distress. And as far as that goes, the rest of us, we were all, you know, we're simply humans having an experience in that moment. Later in my career, I did some teaching. So I love teaching psychopathology. It's a fascinating topic. And I would often warn my students that there truly is a condition or an experience that I love. I love good terminology. This is called psychology student syndrome. It also happens, I understand, to med students, where in studying mental illness and all the ways that the brain can get off balance, you may start to relate to it or even wonder, do I have this? Do I have this? Do I have this? And the reality is maybe you do, and it fell through the cracks, and maybe you don't. Both are possible. So I love people having the information and the awareness of these disorders. So for instance, take OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That's one that when you study it and teach it, you may realize that you yourself plays some sort of games in your head. I see Debbie Clark laughing. So I'm a counter. I look at a clock and I count the numbers until I get to a tens place. I do that pretty often. Doesn't mean that I have OCD. It just means I play this game with myself. So the really critical piece of the definition of mental illness is it causing distress? And is it interfering with functioning in a really profound, significant way? When I worked inpatient, there was a client whose OCD was so severe. I was part of the nursing team, and I would help with ADLs, we call it, activities of daily living. She had a hard time getting out of the shower because she needed to do it in such a way that if she didn't do it right, she was immobilized. She was frozen within her body. That's real OCD. You might also study autism spectrum disorder and wonder, am I on the spectrum? Possibly, because it actually really didn't start getting diagnosed to the 90s. So sometimes you look in retrospect and go, oh, that person, I wonder if they were on the spectrum. But a lot of us have sensory issues, right? Like just being human, you might be really sensitive to sounds or smells. I can't stand a tag in my clothing. I have to cut them all out, right? So you really do wonder. But the key really is paying attention to distress and impairment. But even that sometimes can get tricky. So maybe we think we can detect mental illness when someone is under functioning or really in an acute state of distress, but maybe not. So ADHD, there's a type of it called inattentive type, where someone is not at all hyper or impulsive. And that can really fall through the cracks. I get adults a lot of times who are like, wait a minute, wow, that's what's been wrong with me all these years. That's like what I've had to battle against. And they might be incredibly high functioning and figured out ways to manage it. And so they fell through the cracks. And then there are those who might overfunction in the face of mental illness. And those are really tricky to notice. So I was a very high achieving college student in my sophomore year of college. And I remember my first panic attack. I had no clue what it was. I was a psychology student. And I thought, man, I am really sick. I went home and I was exhausted and I just slept. And I got a 4.0 that semester. Right. So we hear these stories about the college students who are, high functioning, and people are like, we didn't know. And then, and then it's too late. Maybe they committed suicide. So this is an important topic. How do we diagnose mental illness or disorders? How do we detect it? So you may or may not know this. I'll show you my little book. This is our little recipe book, so to speak. This is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5. It's currently up to DSM-5-TR text revision. And this really can inform treatment and prognosis, getting the proper diagnosis. It can be very validating for people to know that this constellation of symptoms they've been struggling with has a name, and that there's something they can do about it, maybe with medicine, maybe with therapy. My bias is typically with both. If it's very severe, cover your bases, ask the questions, am I a candidate for medicine, and also do therapy. Mental illness has been documented throughout time and place, but like these statements, our awareness keeps expanding. So revisions are this really long, extensive process. They just revised the DSM just this year. And our awareness keeps growing and research keeps growing too. And so, for instance, gratefully, in 1973, homosexuality was removed as a disorder from this book. Once upon a time, it was in here. And in 2012, gender identity disorder was removed from this book. So, and it was replaced by gender dysphoria. So we're recognizing now in science that it is not the identity that's the disorder, it's the dysphoria that you can treat that comes along with being told that you are other than who you are, or having incongruence with how your gender, assigned gender, and who you know yourself to be, that incongruence. That's the dysphoria. So our understanding can grow in the other direction too. Real psychological phenomenon can exist and yet not be in the DSM. So that is also true. Hoarding as a psychological disorder made it in 2012. And there's something called complex trauma, which keeps being considered by the board and has not made it yet. And complex trauma is something that I talked about last year when I spoke. My topic was stressed and depressed, and we talked about the collective complex trauma that was going on in our world and actually still is going on from this pandemic. So the bottom line is that we are all surviving something. We are all of the nature to get off balance. What we really need to do is consider the person and their story who's in front of us over their diagnosis, unless you are a mental health clinician or unless you're a psychiatrist. When we want to understand someone, just kind of see the person and their story. So I want to hit pause for a moment, though. Speaking of what we talked about last year, stressed and depressed, and recognizing that we are still in this pandemic. So complex trauma, by way of information, what we do have in the DSM is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Complex trauma has not made it in yet, but what it means is that PTSD is a traumatic response to one particular identifiable trauma that has occurred. Complex trauma, in contrast, is trauma that maybe kept going on, perhaps childhood abuse, or this pandemic is complex trauma. It's not simply, once and done in terms of an incident. It's been ongoing, and we're 2 years into it and still wondering, are we okay? So it's really important for us to recognize signs of when we are stressed and depressed. And I'm using the word depressed in this moment, not clinically, but in the sense that we use it of just feeling maybe down, melancholy in our world, and we all experience stress. So what I'm hoping for in the chat feature up in the top, if you could write in there at least one, but maybe as many as 3 ways that you know when you are really stressed and depressed in your life. What are the red flags? And it can be really hard and yet really validating to admit to ourselves and the other people around us, what it looks like when we're stressed, when we're overwhelmed. So I will name you my top 3. When I'm really stressed and depressed, I'm more irritable. I'm just kind of on edge. Me too, Susan. I also have something called sleep terror disorder. So my sleep terrors kick up at night. It's this awful thing where I'm basically having a panic attack and scream in the middle of the night. That will show up. And I really crave sweets when I'm really overwhelmed, stressed, and depressed. So, okay, yep. Pain can show up in your body. Yep. Difficulty sleeping, it affects our sleep. Absolutely. Sometimes we need more sleep. Sometimes we need less sleep. I'm seeing some of the responses. Absolutely. Simply a disturbance of sleep, simply a disturbance in eating, whether it's eating too much or too high. Teeth grinding is a very real one. Yeah. Wanting to just kind of pull back, not wanting to socialize. These are great. Yeah. Hyper focused. Absolutely. On nits. I'm not sure what nits are. Curious. Who was that one? Irritable. Absolutely. Yeah, I can't think straight. It's really hard to focus and concentrate, right? When we are stressed or overwhelmed in our lives. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for sharing those. So in this statement, absolutely can't focus, Nits are little things that usually would be, oh, gotcha. Thank you, Beth. So little things feel like big things. Absolutely. We are just not quite ourselves, right? Yeah. So in the statement, they quote a statistic from 2010 that still holds up today too, that mental illness is so far reaching, right? 1/2 of Americans will have a serious mental illness condition, but fewer than half of them will receive treatment. So just looking at the signs that we recognize in ourselves, right? We know how pervasive this is. It is so common for us to get off balance. And so it's so part of the human experience. So it begs the question, right, that I think the message was trying to address. Why aren't we getting the help we need, right? If this is so common, why aren't we doing this? So I'm going to read some things that the message says. It proclaims that the gospel's powerful news is there for us, and to offer up the body of Christ as a sign of healing and hope, absolutely. And to consider that the body of Christ is incomplete if people experiencing mental illness are not integrated as a part of the whole. Yes, absolutely. And then I would add, aren't we all experiencing mental illnesses and mental stress to some degree, whether it's us, whether it's people around us? So we need to integrate everyone, right? This is really an inclusive topic, is what I want everyone to know. We absolutely need awareness. We need compassion. We need advocacy for mental health issues. We need a more equitable system. There's disparities sometimes in who can access healthcare in terms of affordable healthcare. And we've come a long way. We have absolutely come a long way from, people thinking that mental illness meant that you were in some way, corrupted by spirits or the devil. But there's still shame. There is still misunderstanding regarding mental disorders, even addiction. So, another thing that I noticed in the statement is that they kind of teased out mental illness and addiction. What I want you to know is that in the DSM, they are simply different categories, all within the broad brushstroke umbrella of mental illness and disorders. So they're really not separate. Addiction and mental illness is one and the same, actually. But that really kind of speaks to this lack of understanding, I think there is, that mental disorders are in fact physical disorders. So we separate those out a lot of times too, in our thinking, in the world, in the healthcare system. So there's a lot of legislation sometimes around having parity with mental health issues, so that the same coverage that you get for something that's a physical disorder is comparable to what you get with a mental health disorder. And it's really interesting to me that we tease this out. We really have this misperception about this. I saw Patrick Kennedy once upon a time. He's one of the Kennedys, and he's done a lot of government work, speak about addiction. He himself has struggled with addiction. His family has struggled very publicly with addiction and trauma. And he talked about how he has actual conversations with Congress, or has had, around the idea and the truth that the brain is of the body, right? The brain is of the body. Let's breathe into that. So when your brain chemistry gets off balance, it is physical. It absolutely is. There's no distinction. So in my life, in my work, there's this amazing Trinity, right? We love the Trinity. There's a Trinity in my world too, between the mind, body, and spirit, and they're so connected. And so I treat and I work with all of those when someone is in my office. So I wanted to read some statements that we sometimes hear. Kind of addresses these misperceptions regarding mental health. And sometimes you can recognize misinformation or a distortion or a bias that we have. If you put it in a different frame, you're like, oh, I would never say that. That's something I would never say. So listen to some of the things that we say or hear other people say pretty regularly. I am weak if I need this medicine. if I need to take this pill. I should just be able to handle this, right? I should just be able to snap out of it. Those are things, hopefully, that are never said about taking insulin or heart medicine, right? They're often said, though, about depression or the other forms of mental disorders. We never say, what's wrong with me that I'm depressed? Or we often hear people say, what's wrong with me that I'm depressed, that I have anxiety? What did I do to deserve this, right? We're blaming ourselves. And that's something that we never say, hopefully, to people with dementia, right? That you deserve that in some way, or that something's wrong with you. We recognize that's physical. We often say, you just need to be more positive, right? You just need the will to live. I hear those. And those are things that, as a breast cancer survivor, I actually did hear sometimes, which is an unfortunate thing to say, because the reality is that it's not true or kind to say that about cancer or depression or addiction. The reality is that who would want to be addicted, right? Who would want to be suicidal? Nobody asked for that. If simply willpower and being positive were the keys, we would all snap out of it, right? It's not the keys. It's here. So how can we help ourselves? And how can we help one another as we journey with Jesus and as we look at mental illness? The ELC message talks about the importance of being in relationship. And absolutely, that's so important. We do not want to be in isolation. Our brain says things to us and tricks us into thinking that we're alone. Some of those things that we just talked about, that you're weak, that you deserve this, you just need to be more positive. So we need to say this out loud to one another. So here's some of the things that I think are really critical, just in terms of how can we help. First of all, I sometimes get asked, if I encounter someone who's struggling, how do I assess them? First of all, know that you're not a mental health clinician, so you don't bear that responsibility. And yet I recognize that as helpers sometimes in a church, you might be the first person that they come to. So having this information, or maybe a friend comes to you, having this information is helpful to be armed with. Even family members, I teach them this, that you want to know. Let's say you're really concerned and you're wondering if someone is a threat to themselves. It's as simple as asking the question, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Sometimes people wonder or worry, am I going to plant that idea? You absolutely are not. You are going to allow and invite the process of speaking about it. If it's not there, they're simply going to say no. Or perhaps maybe they're not ready yet to talk about it. That's another thing. But you ask the question. If they say yes, then what I go into is something called contracting for safety. So now I'm going to assess, how real of a threat is this? Is it what we call passive suicidal ideation? So they're thinking about it and they do not have a plan. They might be saying something like, yeah, I wish I weren't here anymore. I've been suffering, right? And yet I recognize that I don't want to do this. I don't want to, leave my family behind. I want to figure this out. If they have a plan, that's really, is someone asking a question?
I just had to mute someone.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Unless someone has a question.
Not so much? Okay. All right. So yeah, asking about a plan is really critical. If they have a plan and they're not able to say that they would talk to someone before they would think about acting on said plan, then the thing to do is to call 911, call crisis intervention, which is county-based. So depending on what county you're in, you can look up those numbers. Or you can go to your local emergency room. So crisis intervention operates out of emergency rooms and can evaluate people on the spot, which is really important. If someone is not at risk for suicidal thought, you also simply want to assess for what supports do they have? What resources do they have in their life? Who can they talk to? Who is available to them? You might want to refer them to providers. So if perhaps medicine is something that they're asking about, or something that is needed, the person who specializes in that would be a psychiatrist. That said, they're really tough to come by sometimes. They have huge waiting lists. So if you have a family doctor, they're more accessible, and I sometimes will tell people to start with them. You can also, a great way to find therapists like myself is Psychology Today. Go to psychologytoday.com. That's like the best piece that I can tell you in terms of finding a therapist. You can search for your area, you can read about them, you can see pictures. It's great to sometimes know clinicians locally, but the reality is we actually are truly in a pandemic, a mental health pandemic at this point in time. So we're all pretty busy. So maybe you have a name and you give someone a name and maybe they're busy and full. So sometimes it's a matter of persistence and continuing to call until you find someone. And maybe you have connections within your faith community. Maybe you have a support group. Maybe you have some, assistance, financial assistance that can help alleviate some of the stress that they're under. Whatever you have that can connect people would truly be of help too. Promoting mental health awareness within your faith community, however you can do that, certainly just getting together is an amazing way to create fellowship and awareness and support. I think it's also really important that we role model being vulnerable and authentic, right? So if you are someone who is speaking publicly, speak from your stories, speak from your truth, own that you're a human being with feelings. That really gives other people permission to do the same and recognize that, hey, if that person can feel this way, right? If Debbie, who has a PhD, has had a panic attack, maybe I can talk about this, right? It's really important to just do that. You might want to also assess your faith community's welcoming practices with regard to race and gender. It's hard enough being human, and then when you receive messages in the world that who you are or who you love is not okay in some way, that is devastating. And that population, the LGBTQ population, is particularly at risk for suicidal ideation, simply because of that piece. So a resource that's amazing, if you haven't checked it out already, is reconcilingworks.org. They talk about just some ways to be more inclusive and affirming within your faith community, whatever that is. And then the bottom line thing that we're going to talk about in our next 20 minutes-ish, I think, is self-care. So the most important thing that you can do to be of service to other people is truly to take care of yourself. So in this moment, let's take a deep breath into that. And exhale. You matter. We need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of other people. It is as simple as that. So let's add water to that though. In the moment, what that might look like is what we just did. You notice that something is maybe intense or emotional, and you take a deep breath into it. And someone else might even notice that you're doing that. When I do that, when I get really upset with my 8-year-old, I take a deep breath and she notices. Not only does she know that mommy's trying to self-regulate, she also, I'm kind of like an external regulator for her then, right? I'm also inviting her very unconsciously to take a deep breath and slow down in her world. So simply doing that, our breath is always with us. And a mindful deep breath is our most basic thing that I teach in my office of how to take care of yourself, coupled with acknowledgement of what it is in the moment that maybe you're distressed around, that maybe you're having some discomfort around. So you acknowledge it. And here's how you acknowledge it: with openness and curiosity. Okay. If judgment shows up, you notice that too. You notice judgment. But part of what really sets us up for even more distress is that something shows up in our guest house, a depression, a meanness, as the poem goes. And we shame ourselves around it. We want to push it down. We want to move away from the discomfort really quickly. And I get that, because feeling uncomfortable feels uncomfortable, right? And yet, ironically, what therapy invites is slowing down and talking about it, naming it, acknowledging it, getting curious about it. Who is this guest that's knocking on your door? Let's figure it out. In some ways, it might be serving you, right? In some ways, it might be trying to protect you. In some ways, it might be something that you've learned along the way. You can unlearn things too, right? So it's just shining that light on it, that awareness. So you recognize what's going on, you allow the experience to be there, and then you investigate it with kindness and curiosity. How does this make sense to me? And then you might get to the place where, what can I do about it? What can I do to take care of myself in this moment? How can I nurture me with compassion, with love, or the person who's across from me? Let me teach you another one of the most basic things that I use in my office and teach. I use it in conjunction with a technique that is a therapy technique called EMDR. You can look that up if you're interested, but I do a lot of trauma-informed care. But outside of therapy, you can also do this component of it, which is bilateral stimulation. It's called a butterfly hug on your own. So I want everyone to try this, please. So you're going to cross your arms and you are like you're hugging yourself with the wings of a butterfly. You're tapping back and forth. And you might be focused on your breath while you're doing this. Just breathing in and breathing out. And acknowledging whatever is in this moment. So one more deep breath in and slowing down and stopping. You can also do this on someone else. So when I used to put my daughter to bed and she was younger, I would tap on her back. This bilateral stimulation, the interesting science of it is that it's stimulating our left and right hemisphere of our brain, so language and emotion. It's what we do when we're sleeping and we're in REM sleep and our eyes might be going back and forth. It's what we do to process things, right, that we're stuck on in the day, emotions, experiences. We're all trying to desensitize, which is the D, and reprocess it, make sense of it in some way. It's also what we do really instinctively throughout history with babies, right? You rock them. It's our way of soothing them. So you are literally rocking yourself when you are doing this, which is awesome and amazing to know how to do, right? So bigger picture, that's in the moment. Things you can do as a helper. Or pass them on to anyone, because I love teaching those to people. Bigger care, bigger self-care plan. We should all be really hyper vigilant about taking care of ourselves. So when you're shifting gears in between activities, what do? I get up and stretch sometimes. I will sometimes splash cold water on my face, right? Get a drink. I always have water next to me. Before or after work, what do you do to switch gears, right? Are you in the car listening to music? Do you just kind of go outside sometimes and take in nature, which really grounds us, right? We're doing so much with technology and I'm really appreciative of it, but our souls aren't technical, right? They're really grounded to the rhythm of nature. So just getting outside, even looking out a window, can be really great for your mental health and for your self-care. Create a bucket list, right? You know, sometimes the things that get scheduled get done. So do that for yourself. What do you want to do this summer, right? What do you want to do in general in your life? Where do you want to go that you want to make time for? Make sure you schedule your time off. Don't let any of that go to waste, right? Our work is so important, and also our play, our off time, so we can refuel, is absolutely vital. Playing is amazing. So I'm a play therapist. Sometimes people think that means that I only play with kids. I also play with adults. There is a child in every one of us, right? Who needs to color sometimes, who sometimes needs to play a sport, which is really playing, have a game night. color, whatever. Do whatever you do, or do it with a child, right? They ground us and put us in the moments. Fur babies really are about playing, being playful. So those are just, really basic things that you can do for self-care. We're winding down to our last 10 minutes. And here's what I am wanting us to do. I am wanting us to do an activity where we're going to write in the chat room. Let me think through this actually. No, I am going to have you, I was going to have you draw, but I didn't ask you up front about having paper. Can everyone give me a thumbs up if you have something to write with in this moment? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Then we're going to stick to that because I think we have enough time for it. If you don't, go grab something to write with. So you're going to need something to write with and a piece of paper. Doesn't matter what it is. And we have the perfect amount of time for this. Okay. I think that most people have something, so that's amazing. Your step one, if you're with me, is you're going to draw your hand like you did when you were a kid and you were about to make a turkey for Thanksgiving. Remember doing that? Only we're not going to make a turkey. So sketch your hand, trace your hand, and then I'm going to tell you what to do on your hand. Step one, trace your hand. Okay. Let me see, thumbs up from some people I see. Awesome. Okay. All right. So speaking of thumbs up, here's what you're going to do. You are going to now write on your hand. So on your thumb, this is an opportunity for you to give yourself a thumbs up for something you did in the past year that you're proud of. So write in there, what's something you did you're proud of? Give yourself a thumbs up. We don't often do this. And that's an important thing in mental health, is to recognize our strengths, right? What are you doing that you're proud of? Thumbs up if you have that. Okay, you guys are amazing. All right, our index finger. It's the thing we usually do to point something out, right? So can you point out right on there one thing that gets in the way of you taking care of you? We all know it's important, and yet sometimes we put ourselves at the back burner, right? So what gets in the way for you? What's that one thing? Maybe it's more than one thing, but think of one thing in this moment. What gets in the way? In that answer lies information about how to take care of yourself, and start practicing some hypervigilant self-care. Okay, the last three fingers on your hand, and each one of them writes down 3 activities that bring you comfort or joy. It might be particularly highlighted in the past 2 years in this pandemic, right? What were the little joys sometimes? Comfort and joy is all about attachment, right? Finding comfort from other people, from activities. Joy is about playing. It could be simple things, right? Just, I love the smell of my dog. It's one of my joys. I love cuddling with my daughter. So 3 things, 3 activities that bring you comfort or joy, or both. And then we started this talk. I'll give you the last thing. In the palm of your hand, we started this talking about relationships and how important they are to deal with our mental health. So in the palm of your hand, which is where we sometimes hold things that are really sacred to us, write down the names of people or animals or places where you are most connected, where you can feel your most safe, authentic self, where you are in relationship. Maybe it's God, maybe it's nature, maybe it's your partner. So we've got 3 things that bring you comfort or joy, and in the palm of your hands, what's most sacred to you in terms of your relationships and connections. Okay. It's hard to tell on a Zoom if anyone needs more time. Thumbs up if you are okay and do not need more time. Okay. How about in the chat feature? I wonder if anyone would be willing to start writing maybe one thing that brings you comfort and joy. And we'll just kind of see what our list comes up with. At the same time that I invite any questions, we've covered a big, broad topic. So I am aware that there weren't any questions in the chat room. Oh, I love these answers. Making a good meal, kids, hiking, being with family, gardening, conversations with friends. Being with children, absolutely. Camping, grandkids, absolutely. Exercise, taking care of your body, the mind, body, spirit, right? Make sure you are moving your body joyfully, whatever that looks like. Make sure you're fueling it with whatever yummy food you need, and make sure you're sleeping. Those are 3 basic things just to help with our mental health. I loved all those things. Is there any questions that anyone has in this moment that you would like to ask me, a mental health provider? I'm not seeing any of that. Okay, then we will do one last mindfulness exercise. And if at the end of that you have thought of a question, we could do that. But I know I need to get you out by 12:10, and you've been a lovely audience. So let's do a closing prayer. Again, downward gaze or closed eyes if you're comfortable. And settling into your body. And moving back into mindful awareness of your breath that's always with you, carrying you through, sustaining you. So deep breath in through your nose. Deep breath out, exhale. Do one more. And allowing your breath to continue to flow. So, dear Lord, as we continue to journey with you, may we recognize that we are all God's children, and we are all spiritual beings having a human and sometimes very humbling existence. As the body of Christ, may we find graceful engagement with one another as we continue to explore topics that affect us in real time in our world, and as we continue to grow in our understanding of the complexities and diversity of being human and all the conditions that can go along with that. As helpers in our faith communities, may we be courageous enough to role model being vulnerable and real with one another, recognizing that in our weakness lies our superpower to find God's love and light as we serve others. It is in our admitting that we are vulnerable that we truly find our strength. May we tell our stories and listen to the stories of others with curiosity and respect and openness, recognizing we are all of the nature to become ill. May we practice hypervigilant self-care for our bodies, mind, and spirit. And may we recognize that that self-care is so critical because of these truths. Because I hurt, because I matter, because the people I serve matter, because the work I do matters, because the church and my profession matters, because I must take care of me so I can take care of you. So breathing into that truth and that wisdom, deep breath in, let it go. In God's name we pray. Amen. You have been lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So I'm just going to pop in here for a second to let you all know that we're going to go back to the main Zoom event link that you were on earlier this morning for a few closing remarks and sending prayer. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you,
I hope
Debbie.
that everyone enjoyed it and got some helpful tips, and that we can be very vigilant in our self-care.
Practice butterfly.
Thank you.
And deep breath. Thank you.